So, I was sitting in a conference session a few weeks ago. The conference organizers lauded this session as a highly thought provoking look into the future of our industry. So, I grabbed a coffee, took a seat in the back, and got ready to take some notes. What followed was 45 minutes of a guy standing on stage, aggressively scaring the absolute shit out of everyone in the room about artificial intelligence. He didn't have slides, or maybe his slides weren't working, but he was dead serious while outlining this terrifying, slippery slope into what he called cognitive submission, this inevitable dystopia where we all just blindly surrender our brains to the algorithms. It was a masterclass in doomsday prophesying. But you know what he didn't offer? A single practical takeaway. Zero risk mitigation methods. Just 45 minutes of pure panic, and then he said, "Any questions?" Since he only left 30 seconds before the next session needed to kick off, I didn't get the chance to thank him for scaring the living piss out of everyone and ask if any of his work actually involved productive risk mitigation efforts. I walked out of that room and immediately thought back to the podcast discussions we've had here on the show about fear appeals and threat appeals. We know the science on this. If you hit people with a massive threat but offer no efficacy, no tools to actually manage the threat, they just shut down. They ignore you. I have very little patience for fearmongers. I am incredibly optimistic about the opportunities for AI in occupational safety and health, but we have to be able to talk about the risks rationally without the sci fi panic. So, I'm a little on edge after that session, and today we are going to channel that energy into breaking down a brand new study on how AI actually impacts human thinking. We're going to strip away the panic, look at the data, and find some real takeaways. It's an all new Prove It To Me. Welcome back to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. Let's dive right in, shall we? This episode actually started with a post I saw on Facebook from a page called Educators Technology. The post had a screenshot of a study abstract, and the caption caught my eye. It said, "Metacognitive laziness is what happens when students let the AI do the thinking work they should be doing themselves." This is the concept Fan et al. 2025 use in their research paper on generative AI and learning. In simple terms, students may rely on ChatGPT so much that they stop monitoring their own thinking. They revise, accept, and move on, but they do not pause to evaluate, question, or reflect on what is happening. Now, the post went on to make a very rational point. The issue isn't that people use AI, it's how they use it. Banning it and calling it a day won't prepare anyone for the real world. We have to teach critical use. Now, to my absolute shock, a Facebook page actually linked to the legitimate DOI in the comments. So I clicked it, I downloaded the PDF, and I poured a cup of coffee. The paper is titled "Beware of Metacognitive Laziness: Effects of Generative Artificial Intelligence on Learning Motivation, Processes, and Performance." It was published in the British Journal of Educational Technology by a team of researchers out of Peking University and Monash University. We are going to take our time with this one today. We will look at how they measured this laziness, what the actual outcomes were, and most importantly, how this directly applies to the EHS professional who is using ChatGPT to write safety policies and JSAs. Let's get into the methodology. The researchers wanted to see what happens when learners interact with different types of support agents. So they set up a randomized experimental study in a lab. They recruited 117 university students, all of whom had English as a second language, and gave them a two-stage reading and writing task. The students were asked to read some materials on AI and differentiated teaching, and then write an essay envisioning the future of education in the year 2035. They split these 117 students into four groups. Number one, the control group. They had no extra help, just their brains and a timer. Number two, the AI group. They had access to ChatGPT 4.0 integrated into their platform, restricted to the task topics. Number three, the human expert group. They had a chat interface connected to a real live professional academic writing teacher. Then lastly, the checklist group. They used a writing analytics toolkit that gave automated rubric based feedback on things like grammar, academic style, and originality. The researchers tracked everything. They tracked intrinsic motivation, they tracked the actual keystrokes and mouse clicks to see how the students were working, which they called trace data, and they tracked the final essay scores and knowledge transfer. Now let's talk about the results, starting with the behavioral piece, this idea of metacognitive laziness. When the researchers looked at the trace data, they mapped out the self regulated learning processes. They found a massive difference in how the AI group behaved compared to the human expert group and the checklist group. In the AI group, the students got stuck in this highly efficient, totally thoughtless loop. The data showed frequent transitions between writing and immediately interacting with ChatGPT over and over. What were they missing? The data showed they were skipping the orientation and evaluation phases. When students worked with a human expert, they had to pause, evaluate their own work, orient themselves to the rubric, formulate a specific question, and then process the human's response. With ChatGPT, they just dumped the text in, let the bot refine it, pasted it back, and asked for more. The researchers defined this as metacognitive laziness, offloading the metacognitive load to AI, where the learner depends on the assistance and stops effectively evaluating their own work. Now, if I put my highly skeptical, sarcastic researcher hat on for a second, oh no! College students figured out the path of least resistance to finish a mandatory writing assignment in a lab. Stop the presses. Call the Nobel Committee. Humans using a tool to avoid doing hard mental work is not exactly a groundbreaking discovery. But where the study gets genuinely fascinating is when we look at the performance data. If the AI group was being lazy and skipping the evaluation phase, you would expect their work to suffer, right? Wrong. The AI group absolutely crushed the essay scores. They showed significantly greater score improvements than the control group, the checklist group, and, this is the wild part, they beat the human expert group. The students who just bounced text back and forth with ChatGPT produced significantly better academic essays than the students who received personalized coaching from a professional academic writing instructor. But here is the catch. The researchers didn't just grade the essay, they gave the students a post test to measure knowledge gain. Did they learn about AI in education? And knowledge transfer, could they apply these concepts to AI in healthcare? The results? There were zero significant differences between any of the groups in knowledge gain or knowledge transfer. Now that's interesting, right? The AI group produced a vastly superior product, but they didn't actually learn anything more than the control group who stared at a blank screen for 2 hours. The researchers noted that the students essentially used ChatGPT to cater perfectly to the scoring rubric without absorbing the underlying knowledge. The product was perfect, the process was empty. So, how do we take an academic study about college essays and apply it to the mud and steel of occupational safety and health? Because the exact same phenomenon is happening in safety departments across the country right now. We are constantly tasked with producing written products, job hazard analyses or JHAs, confined space entry permits, fall protection plans, toolbox talks, incident and investigation summaries. And right now, thousands of EHS professionals are using ChatGPT to help write them. If you go to ChatGPT and say, write a job hazard analysis for replacing a 50-ton chiller unit on a commercial roof, it will spit out a beautiful, formatting perfect, OSHA compliant document in 15 seconds. If you suffer from metacognitive laziness, you look at that document, you say, wow, this looks incredibly professional. You copy it, paste it onto company letterhead, and you sign your name to it. You just achieved a very high essay score. Your compliance auditor is going to look at that document and give you a gold star. But did you actually evaluate the likelihood of the specific risks on your actual job site? ChatGPT doesn't know that the parapet wall on your specific roof is deteriorating. It doesn't know that the crane setup area is right next to an active loading dock. When you offload the cognitive work to the AI, you get a pristine piece of paper, but you completely bypass the critical safety engineering process in your own brain. When we talk about risk assessments, assessing the likelihood of an event occurring requires context. It requires human observation. It requires knowing your specific crew, your specific site, and your specific equipment constraints. The AI cannot do that. The risk here isn't cognitive submission. We aren't becoming slaves to the algorithm. The risk is simply the rubber stamp syndrome. We are so enamored with how good the output looks that we assume the underlying logic is perfectly adapted to our reality. Now, I promised you we wouldn't just do a fear appeal today. We're not banning AI in the safety department. That is a completely backwards, head in the sand approach. If you ban it, your people are just going to use it on their personal phones anyway. Trust me, that's what happens in academia. And then you have zero visibility into how your programs are being generated. Instead, we manage the risk. We implement scaffolding. Here are your practical takeaways for leveraging AI in OSH without falling into the metacognitive laziness trap. Number one, the rubric is king. One of the most profound lines in this entire study was an observation by the researchers regarding why the AI group scored so well on the essay. They noted that ChatGPT was particularly good at providing feedback and promoting learning when it was based on the specific criteria provided in the scoring rubric. If you want to use AI to write safety procedures, you cannot just use open ended prompts. You have to feed it your corporate rubric. Before you ask it to draft a JHA, you need to prompt it with, here is our corporate risk matrix. Here is how we define severity. Here is how we define likelihood. Here is our hierarchy of controls policy. Now, using these specific parameters, draft a JHA for this task. Constrain the AI with your organizational reality. Number two, mandate the red pen review. You have to build friction into the review process. If an EHS coordinator uses AI to generate a safety plan, the policy must be that the plan is brought to the job site, printed out on paper, and physically red penned by the site superintendent and the workers performing the task. Or, if you are trying to be sustainable, you do the digital equivalent of that. You use the AI to defeat the blank page to get 80% of the way there, but the final 20% must be a mandatory site specific evaluation. You have to force the evaluation phase that the AI makes it so easy to skip. Now, number three, don't sleep on checklists. This was a fascinating secondary finding in the study. The group that used the checklist tool, the writing analytics software, actually reported the highest scores for interest, enjoyment, and perceived competence, along with the lowest pressure and tension. Sometimes you don't need a generative conversational AI. Sometimes you just need a smart checklist. If you are auditing a site, an AI tool that simply flags missing components in your report based on a pre programmed checklist forces you to go back and do the cognitive work yourself. It keeps the human in the driver's seat of the evaluation process. Now, that is going to wrap it up for this episode. I highly recommend checking out the study by Fan and colleagues, and of course, I will put the DOI link in the show notes so you can read the methodology for yourself. We don't need to fear AI. We just need to respect it. And we need to be honest about our own human tendencies to take the path of least resistance. Keep using the tools, but do not outsource your professional judgment. Now, if you got something out of today's conversation, please take a second to rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It truly is the best way to help other safety professionals find the show and keep our industry moving in the right direction. And if you've got a crazy story about an AI-generated safety document gone wrong, or if you just want to argue with me about my take today, shoot me an email at contact@proveitpod.com. Stay safe, verify your outputs, and I'll catch you on the next one. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.